Chag Sameach. Some parashiot in the Torah have such evident and explicit lessons that when I sit down to write a Drasha, it's a matter of just picking one of many, but not this week's parasha, because Bamidbar is a parasha of lists, of numbers, and a parasha where HaKadosh Baruch Hu sets the stage for the next part of the journey. Or as Rav Moshe Lichtenstein suggested, Bamidbar is the quiet before the storm, the interlude, preceded by a strong, unchallenged leadership of Moshe Rabbeinu, and followed by stories of a leadership diminished. Nevertheless, there are messages, and it's to one of those less obvious messages that I want to draw your attention. To the fact that 4 times in the Chumash, beginning with this week's parasha, we find psukim where the tribes of Binyamin and Dan, despite their different birth order, are discussed side by side. And so in the first chapter of this parasha, the 9th shevet that was counted was Binyamin, and the 10th was Dan. And the same thing happens 3 more times in Bamidbar. And then once again in Sefer Yechezkel. What's the connection between these 2 tribes? Tribes whose namesakes were the offspring of different mothers, Dan from Bilham and Binyamin from Rachel. Why does the Torah place them one after the next? Rav Nachman Kahana, who was my teacher many years ago and the brother of the late Meir Kahana, Hashem Yikom Damo, suggested that maybe the answer begins with the fact that Binyamin had 10 sons, while Dan had only 1, a special needs child named Chushim. As Rav Kahana wrote, try to imagine the scene in Yaakov Avinu's home. Yaakov Avinu is sitting there surrounded by his wives, his 12 sons and daughters, and his many grandchildren. And Binyamin is there, looking around with great joy, thinking that since he had 10 sons, the most of any of Yaakov Avinu's children, his descendants would be the largest and most influential shevet among the Jewish people. Well, Dan, he looked around in envy, for he had only 1 son, Chushim, a young man challenged with hearing and speech disabilities. What kind of future was in store for his shevet? But in God's world, everything is possible, because when the Jews left Egypt by that time, the tribe of Dan already outnumbered the tribe of Binyamin by 27,300 men. And in Sefer Shoftim, following a tragic civil war, Binyamin was reduced to just 600 men. And while Dan was so numerous that part of the tribe had to leave their homeland in the center of the country and move north, just so they would have enough space to live. All of which teaches, concluded Rabbi Kahana, that in God's world, the improbable is always possible. In God's world, the unexpected happens. And as Ben Gurion said, to be a realist, you must believe in miracles, which is the message I want you to remember tonight as we celebrate Yom Yerushalayim. Because in 1967, the state of Israel was a mere shadow of what it is today. The army was small, the economy stagnant, and the population unprepared for war. 3 weeks before the war, Gamal Abdel Nasser ordered the UN peacekeeping troops to evacuate the Sinai. He blocked the Straits of Tiran and prepared to destroy Israel. At that time, Israel had 275,000 soldiers compared to 456,000 soldiers in the Arab armies. Israel had only 1,000 tanks compared to nearly 3,000 tanks in the Arab armies. Israel had less than half the number of fighter planes and helicopters and less than a quarter of the number of bombers than the Arab armies. And yet in God's world, the improbable is always possible. And in 6 days, miracles happened. And so 53 years ago, on the 28th of Iyar, the third day of the war, Rafal Amir of Kol Yisrael broadcast the following live report. He said, it's 10:20 a.m. on June 7th. And at this moment, we're driving through the Lion's Gate in a Jeep with Israel's deputy chief of staff and the commander of the Central Command. I'm now in the shadow of that gate. Now we're in the sun again, in the street. We're inside the Ir Atika, the old city. You can hear shouting all around us, and the soldiers are up against all of the walls crying, La Kotel, to the Kotel. Handing the microphone off to Commander Motagur, the late chief of staff added, it's hard to express what we're feeling. We saw the old city to our right when we were on the crest of Augusta Victoria. Now we're hoarse from shouting and excitement. This morning, our half-track broke down through the gate and went over a motorbike. It went through the Jordanian camp, and we were first to get up to Har HaBayit. Moishelim, who's been my deputy for many years, took some men and ran to raise the flag above the Kotel. Now the whole old city is in our hands, and we're ecstatic. The Rafal Amir took the mic and said, at this moment, at this very moment, I'm going down the steps to the Kotel. I'm not religious and never have been, but this is the Kotel, and I'm now touching the stones of the Kotel. In God's world, the improbable is always possible. And in 6 days, miracles happened, which is also the story Rav Goren told on that day, as he wrote in his autobiography that at the moment I approached the Lion's Gate, I began to blow the shofar because according to halakha, in the time of war, the shofar must be blown. That's the way our victory is assured, and that's the reason I took a shofar with me, to sound it at the liberation of Yerushalayim. I blew that shofar, continued Rav Goren, until I came to a tank stuck in the Lion's Gate, blocking the entrance to the Temple Mount. I jumped on the tank and went down the other side, and suddenly I found myself at the gates of Har HaBayit. In the name of God, I called out, go forth and succeed. In the name of God, liberate Yerushalayim. Rav Goren descended the Temple Mount and made his way to the Kotel. He davened, he said the Kel Maleh for those who had died, and then he decided to go once again up to Har HaBayit. There he found Motagur, and he asked him if he had entered yet into the Dome of the Rock. Rav Goren told Motagur that he had to bring engineers to open up the building just in case there were snipers inside. And then Rav Goren told Motagur that he wanted to go inside with his Torah and with his shofar that he had borrowed from his father-in-law, the Nazir of Yerushalayim, and he'd been sounding all day long. This would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Rav Goren, because under normal circumstances, it would be prohibited to enter the Dome of the Rock, but this was a Sh'at Milchama, a time of war, and he would be going into that sacred site to inspect it, to make sure that it was safe, and to reclaim it for the entire Jewish people. And therefore, Rav Goren paskined, this one time it would be permitted. Wrote Rav Goren, Mota brought the sapers and they checked all around the building. They broke into the front doors and we walked into the Mosque of Omar, the Dome of the Rock. I was amazed because this was the fulfillment of a dream. I was in this sacred place. I blew the shofar and I recited Tehillim, all while holding that Sefer Torah. Who could have ever imagined such a sight? The chief rabbi of the Israeli army holding a Torah, blowing a shofar, praying in the very site where Yitzchak had once been bound and the Aron, the ark, had rested. In God's world, the improbable is always possible. And in 6 days, miracles happened. Or as Avram Duvduvani, a good friend of ours who has davened with us at KINS and who is the very first religious person to have what was once Theodore Herzl's job as the chairman of the World Zionist Organization, as Duvdev wrote, soon after he participated as a paratrooper in the liberation of Yerushalayim, we went through a gate and down some steps. I looked to the right and stopped dead. There was the Kotel in all of its grandeur and glory. I had never seen it before, but it was an old friend, impossible to mistake. Then I thought that I shouldn't be there because the Kotel belongs in the world of dreams and legends, and I am real. Reality and legend, dream, indeed, all unite here, wrote Duvdev. I went down and approached the Kotel, and I stretched out my hand towards the huge, hewn stones, but my hand was afraid to touch it, and by itself it returned to me. I closed my eyes, took a small, hesitant step forward, and brought my lips to the wall. The touch of my lips opened the gates of my emotions, and the tears burst forth. A Jewish soldier in the state of Israel is kissing history with his lips. Past, present, and future, all in one kiss, wrote Duvdev. And I knew then that there will be no more destruction, and the Kotel will never again be deserted. It was taken with young Jewish blood, and the worth of that blood is eternity. The body is coupled to the stone row of stones, the face is pushed into the spaces between them, and the hands try to reach its heart. A soldier near me mumbles in disbelief. We're at the Kotel. At the Kotel. In God's world, the improbable is always possible. And 53 years ago, on the 28th day of Iyar, miracles happened. And that's why we celebrate tonight and why we will celebrate tomorrow. And please God, why very soon we will celebrate all together, because miracles do happen. And the realities of today can, in an instant, be transformed through the power of God. Because in God's world, there's always hope. And in God's world, there are miracles. And in God's world, the improbable is always possible. So remember Hushim, the disabled son of Dan, who gave rise to the largest tribe. And remember the state of Israel that continues to thrive. And remember the miracle of those 6 days, the majesty of our eternal capital, Yerushalayim. Ir she'osa kol Yisrael chaverim, the city that unites our people. And be sure to thank God for this day. Shehachiyanu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Chag Sameach and Shabbat Shalom.